Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and welcome to This Week in Mythic Plus. This week's affixes are Tyrannical, Teeming, Volcanic, and the Awakened pattern has switched back over to the A pattern from the B pattern that was active last week. This is a pretty good week for most levels of Keystone. As you start getting really high, like into the 20s, that'll be where Tyrannical starts to be a problem just in terms of the timer and in terms of one-shotting your group. And Teeming also can be a problem in terms of just beating a timer. Teeming is one of those affixes that feels pretty easy, but it adds a lot of pulls over the course of each dungeon, and that really slows down how fast you can do the whole thing in. So for high-level keys where the timer is an issue, that's when this is going to start to be a pretty bad week. You know, last week we saw a lot of teams pushing up their Radar IO score, approaching that 5,000 score mark or whatever. Those teams aren't going to be pushing this week. This week is not a week for that kind of action. But this is a great week to get like all of your 15s in time, all of your 10s in time, because Teeming, you know, one of the ones that doesn't actually impact the actual play of the dungeon, right? Just put some more mobs in there. Volcanic, one that has very little impact. And I think Tyrannical is probably easier than Fortified until you start getting to about the 20 level, where there's this inflection point, and then Tyrannical actually becomes really, really bad for pushing keys. So pretty good week to go out there and get your achievements. Let's go dungeon by dungeon and talk about what each one is up to this week. Atal'Dazar, one of the harder dungeons just this season. It's okay this week. So with Teeming, there's a little bit of an RNG component. There's these two enemies in this pack on the edges of this one. This little 3-pack here and this 3-pack here. Those aren't guaranteed to spawn on Teeming. It's RNG which of them will spawn. So my route, which you can find all these routes in the description below or on Radar IO every week, my route says to just not bother pulling any of those spots where there could be RNG, but you know, a good option, for instance, if these two enemies, this Confessor and Juggernaut, aren't in this 3-pack here, you could add this to your first pull. That's a pretty good thing to do if that hasn't spawned there. So other than that, things you're looking at here with Teeming active, it's really hard to get all the count you need without pulling stuff that you don't normally pull in here. Your options are like you could pull a couple extra packs in this area, or my favorite thing to do is actually just pull the mid-pack. The mid-pack is something that's scary for a lot of people, but especially this week, there's really not anything empowering it at all. None of the affixes make it any worse. You can even snap this pack onto one of the snap spots here if you're comfortable doing that, and then they'll do basically nothing except tank damage, and that can be pretty great for getting a lot of extra count, because these guys are worth quite a bit of count. Other than that, I think that the one thing you have to decide is if you want to fight an awakened enemy with the last boss, the blob is the one that's in this awful spot next to this double honor guard pull. And I think that's one of the easiest ones to fight with Yasma. So I recommend doing that, even though it's Tyrannical and it's, you know, harder week to fight enemies with end bosses. I think that this is a dungeon in particular where the downside of not doing that is pretty high. If you're looking great on the timer, you know, you can go over and activate this thing individually, but then you have to deal with tentacles and it slows things down a lot. And if you pull it with Yasma, that, you know, it already is kind of pretty easy to pull with Yasma because you're moving around the whole room anyways during that fight. Tyrannical Freehold is always a little bit sketchy in the high-level keys, just because there's a lot of boss abilities that will do a lot of damage to you. So like Sky Captain Crag, Eudora, tough things that you're going to have Bloodlust available for. But other than that, it's nothing else should be too problematic. You're going to need to pull like one extra pack than you normally do, 1 or 2 extra packs, depending on how you pull usually to make up for the extra count because of Teeming. But besides that, nothing really super notable here. Again, I've got a route that suggests fighting an awakened enemy with the last boss, even though I don't normally like suggesting this on Tyrannical week. In Freehold in particular, Harlan does like basically nothing above 60% health. And the Spider is it's so natural to just pull this with the last boss and not have to go over there and activate this obelisk. So I'd recommend doing this if you're feeling up to it. But if you're scared about it, or if you have a lot of extra time, you could instead pull this over here and come out, pull this pack, and then activate this obelisk and bring it to Harlan that way. So if you're scared, that's something you could do, but it's really easy. This is one of the easiest awakened enemies to fight with an end boss, so I would try that. King's Rest, I think one of the things that is going to kill a lot of groups here, every teaming week, I always see this, where groups pull these first 2 packs together here in this room, and you can't do that this week because the Witch Doctor's in both packs, so you need to do this room in 4 pulls instead of 3. Most teaming weeks I come in this place, the tank ends up dying from pulling 2 of these at once, so be careful of that. This room's a little bit slower than usual. Other than that, nothing too notable in terms of what's going to change your pathing in here this week. Just, you know, Tyrannical bosses are going to be a big problem for you, and everything else is close to normal with just a couple extra enemies splattered around. spattered around. Shrine of the Storm, you have to make up a lot of extra count this week, so you have to pick like your options that for stuff that you don't normally pull, because you're gonna have to pull some stuff that you don't normally pull. Your options are like a bunch of stuff in this area, or some more stuff in this area, like these mini bosses, which is what I've chosen for this route, or you can pull stuff in this area, or if you don't normally pull the bridge, you can pull the bridge. You basically have to pull all but one of those kind of general areas of the dungeon, and on most weeks you can usually skip 2 or 3 of those areas, so it's a little bit more annoying that way. You're going to have to fight some trash that you don't actually prefer to fight, but it is what it is. That's teaming in here. Beyond that, there's not really too much challenge except for tyrannical bosses, so not the end of the world. Siege of Boralus, not too bad in here. Teeming doesn't really add any extra pulls, except for you get this commander patrol, which you can skip, but I'm pulling it here because it's a little bit annoying to skip, and skipping it means that you're going to have a less reliable run back if you need to use this graveyard here. And then you're going to have to pull a couple extra enemies after you portal over to the spotter. You can use the spotter to kill these pulls, which is a good strategy. Or if you're not feeling like you want to do that, you can just pull them the old-fashioned way after killing the spotter, and it'll be safer but slower. Temple of Sethraliss adds a couple of patrols of stealth enemies. So one of them is getting pulled in this route in the first room. Make sure that you actually get the neutral Crowlust catchlings as well. They have very little health, but they'll sometimes not actually come and fight you. And they will despawn when the Shrouded Fang dies, and they're each worth 1 count. So you may end up missing some count if you end up not getting these 2 hatchlings. Now, luckily, there's a little bit of room for error in your total count here, because at the end you could just grab these 2 extra ones during the last boss fight and make up any count that you missed from those. But if you don't want to have to do that, make sure that you've killed all the hatchlings. There's also this extra patrol here of stealth Shrouded Fangs, so that's why I like having this portal come out over here. A lot of groups will kind of default to having this portal exit here, but by doing this, you run the risk of running into these Shrouded Fangs when you don't want to, because they're stealth. And we really don't need the extra count here anyways, because with Awakened, temple routes have generally evolved to pulling more stuff in this area, so that you can get access to this spire more easily, and that has meant that we have more than enough count, and we don't need to get any of these patrols that are in this area. Do watch out, of course, for this 5 Dervish pull. You probably can't Bloodlust this, because you need it for Galv, but this is going to be a stress point for your healer, and especially if you're not using cooldowns on this pull. It's worth it to use some cooldowns on this pull, even if it means you're going to have a little bit less for Galv, just probably not Bloodlust. It's a pretty good week for the Motherlode. The Motherlode is one of the few dungeons where even in high-level keys, Tyrannical is often better than Fortified. Although both affixes are fine this season for the Motherlode, but it's one of the better dungeons for this week. Teeming in here just means you're going to have to do a couple extra pulls throughout the place. I've added them mostly in this area, and a little bit more in this area than normal as well, perhaps. And I'm still not pulling much of anything in these areas. If you wanted to, you could instead pull some more in this area. You could pull some War Machines. Those are pretty good count. Especially if you end up not wanting to get all of this extra stuff over here. That's an option for you. But I personally prefer fighting this stuff because I think it's more efficient. Up to you, though, however you prefer here. This is going to be a strategy that probably involves bloodlusting this pull here, so the third pull of the dungeon, these guys, or even this first pull of the dungeon. And then you can use your second bloodlust on this boss. The way that this normally works out is you kind of clear up to this area, and then you look at your bloodlust timer, and if it's still got a couple minutes on it, you can go pull some more trash. Whereas if your bloodlust is going to be ready soon, you go straight to the boss and use your bloodlust, and that way you'll make sure that you can get 4 throughout the dungeon. Underrot is another dungeon where I'm advising fighting an awakened enemy with the last boss this week. This is tricky, and depending on what key level you're doing, this may not be necessary, and you may be inviting just more risk than you need to be doing this. So the reason I want to fight this enemy with the last boss is that it's really inefficient to come over here and kill these enemies in this area to get access to this spire. And you know, if you do that, you also have to go and kill enemies in this area to get access to this spire, and it gets kind of ugly. But you know, if you've got 10 extra minutes on the clock, probably the only way you're going to deplete the key is by fighting an awakened enemy with the last boss and wiping because of it. So you'll want to, bring this over here and clear out some enemies here and get this extra obelisk here. If you can identify you're going to do that beforehand, you can even skip trash like this pull and, make it so that you're not going way over count. This week, the enemy that is in this spire is Samrek, the fear guy. People are scared of fighting this one with last bosses. They're used to doing the spider or the blob, and they're scared of this one. It's really not that bad, especially with this boss. You just have to make sure that you're getting feared away from danger. So you always get feared away from the fear guy himself. You want to make sure that you don't have puddles of bad stuff or spores behind you when this is happening on the last boss fight. But it's really not so bad. Other than that, he really doesn't do all that much, and this can be done. So I'd recommend this if you're pushing keys at a level where the timer matters. If the timer doesn't matter and it's just a question of if you wipe or not, then kill this guy by himself. That's fine. Nothing super important to report about Tol Dagor. Tol Dagor, one of the dungeons where Volcanic actually has a couple of spots that are going to be tricky for you. So there are 2 boss fights really where Volcanic can get you. In this boss fight, if you're stacked up during the intermission when he stuns you, you could have a couple of unlucky volcano spawns actually destroy your whole group. So be careful of that. Especially if you were all like clumped up behind a corner to line of flashing daggers. I've seen that actually kill people before, so be careful of that. But the main spot where Volcanic actually gets really annoying is the last boss fight. So you really want to have Bloodlust for this boss on Tyrannical, just kind of always, but especially this week, just make sure that you're being careful here. Make sure that your healers and your ranged players are really careful with their Heartstopper Venom bar. They're not moving unnecessarily, so that they can move when they need to for Volcanic. Waycrest with Teeming, there's kind of one area that you're really going to feel Teeming, and that is here, where there's just a bunch of witches that you're going to fight all at once. Other than that, it's, you'll just end up pulling a couple extra mobs out of the dungeon. You're not really going to feel it. And it's Tyrannical going to be the operative affix here, so Tyrannical Heartsbane Triad. No longer a big DPS check. They nerfed the DPS check here by quite a lot, but still a serious healing check. And kind of a DPS check to kill it before your healer can no longer heal you. One big thing to make sure you do here is you're topped before Sister Selena gets control again, because you have a healing reduction aura when she's the active one. So at the end of Sister Briar's first phase, use any health stones or health potions that you have if you're not topped, because they'll be less effective when Selena's active, and you don't want to rot down during that phase. So it's less important than it was last week with Grievous active, but it's still something that you're going to want to watch out for on Tyrannical Week. Junkyard, bit of a mess on Teeming. A lot of extra enemies here, especially in this area. Actually, a bunch of extra slimes and stuff pulled throughout here. Slimes are very deadly. The no-meeting slimes. This is an enemy that I think catches people by surprise, just how much of the damage output of each pull actually comes from these. I would try not to pull more than one of these at once if you can avoid it. And you're going to have to pull a couple extra enemies here. I ended up the Teeming route ends up being like 4 or 5 extra pulls throughout the dungeon. I still am advocating this strategy, so if this is the first time you've seen one of my Junkyard routes, you look at this and you're like, wow, there's a lot more arrows and notes than there are in a usual route. That's because I want to go left here and get these shock bots, which really, the reason you're seeing teams 2 chest plus 25 Junkyard and time plus 26 Junkyard is because these shock bots do a huge amount of your damage, and they scale with the level of the key. So as you're pushing keys higher and higher, your damage relative to the health of the enemies is also going up, which this is the only keystone where that's true. And the shock bots are the reason why. So the reason I like going left at the start is because you get access to this shock bot, these 2, and this one on like your first pull or your second pull. You can have somebody who's a stealth class go and get the one in the tunnels as well. And that can really help you out. But you have to be careful, right? Because sometimes the hard mode enemy will be flying above Gunker. This, I don't think, is going to be happening in North America this week, but I think it might be happening in Europe. So if you zone into Junkyard and the hard mode enemy is flying above Gunker, don't go there. You're going to have to use a different route. You're going to have to go away from the hard mode enemy. Don't fight the hard mode enemy, or don't fight under the hard mode enemy ever. Workshop Tyrannical, really going to be all about the boss fights. None of the other affixes are too impactful. Teeming, you're going to feel it in here, where you've got a couple extra enemies that you don't normally need to pull here, or that you do pull here, but there's more than one of them. And then you can actually skip 1 pack of Living Wastes here, because this is not enough to mean that you don't have to pull one of these robots. On a non-teaming week, you never have to pull either of these robots because you have enough to count from the rest of the dungeon. But this week, you're going to have to pull one of them, and that pull allows you to skip this pack of Living Wastes. So the way that I do that is you kill these 2 waste processing units, and then you can take the portal over here and come back this way and never have to pull this pack. It's a minor thing, pulling this pack is usually not too bad, so you can just do that if it pulls, it's no big deal, but you're still, no matter what, you're gonna have to pull, even if you pull every other enemy in the dungeon, you're gonna have to pull one of these 2 robots, so it's not the end of the world to do that. Just, try and get into the shield generators when it's doing its short out, and kill it first. All right, that's it for this week in Mythic Plus. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to hit like and subscribe and stuff. Check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Ratnos. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.